In the eyes of many, the Great Council of 101 AC thereby established an iron precedent on matters of succession. Regardless of seniority, the Iron Throne of Westeros could not pass to a woman, nor through a woman to her male descendants, fire and blood, heirs of the dragon, a question of succession. Laenor Velaryon is one of the most compelling, more minor characters during the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons, but he often finds himself overshadowed by those considered the main players, the likes of Rhaenyra Targaryen, Alicent Hightower, and to some extent even his own mother, Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. Even more, a lot of these issues have also been compounded slightly with House of the Dragon's interpretation of his character and the history of Westeros prior to the start of the show. If we call Rhaenys the queen who never was, maybe it's also fair to argue that Laenor Velaryon, the eldest son of Corlys Velaryon and Princess Rhaenys, husband to Rhaenyra, and as well supposed father of her eldest 3 sons, might rightly be the king who never was. In this video, we'll be taking a deep dive into the character of Laenor Velaryon, the forgotten context of the Great Council of 101 AC, and answering the question if he should have been king. Laenor was born in 94 AC to Lord Corlys Velaryon and Princess Rhaenys Targaryen during a very rare politically turbulent time during the reign of King Jaehaerys I Targaryen. The issues date back 2 years prior to 92 AC, when his mother Rhaenys was still pregnant with his elder sister, Laena. Prince Aemon Targaryen, Rhaenys' father and the eldest son and heir of King Jaehaerys I, was killed fighting Myrish pirates on Tarth by a badly aimed crossbow bolt meant for the man he stood beside. It had only been days prior that Rhaenys learned that she was pregnant, telling her father as he flew off to war. The death of Aemon would cause a political headache, with it not being wholly clear who Jaehaerys' new heir should be. On one hand, you had Princess Rhaenys, Aemon's only child, and of course her own unborn child, whom very well could have been a boy. Then you also have the king's second son, Prince Balon the Brave, who was already in his 30s with grown heirs of his own in Prince Viserys and Daemon. The king chose Balon over Rhaenys and her unborn child. Many would put this choice down to the fact that Rhaenys was a woman, while some say it was because Balon offered stability with established heirs. The truth is, it is likely a mix of both. While this was widely accepted, it did cause political divisions. Most notably, Good Queen Alysanne, Jaehaerys' wife, was particularly unhappy with Jaehaerys' decision. By the time that Laenor was born, in 94 AC, Balon had already been firmly encosted as the heir apparent. Regardless of this, both House Velaryon and Baratheon, from whom Rhaenys descends, insisted that the newly born Laenor had the better claim to the Iron Throne than Balon, a claim they would not let lie. Prince Balon too suddenly died in 101 AC, with the question of Jaehaerys' heir unclear yet again. The key issue was that although Balon had left behind 2 living sons, he had indeed been a second son, while Laenor and his mother and sister could claim descent from Jaehaerys' firstborn son, while the claims to the Iron Throne of Rhaenys and thus Laena had already been firmly dismissed by this time. Laenor would be another matter, a more complicated one, not so easily dismissed. As soon as news reached Driftmark that Balon had died, it is rumoured that Corlys Velaryon had already given the call to gather ships and men to Driftmark to defend his son's right to the Iron Throne. What did Viserys ever have that she did not? A little sausage. Is that all it takes to be king? Mushroom. On the choice of succession. Fire and blood. The dying of the dragons. The blacks and the greens. A great council was called to decide the matter, to take place at the ruined castle of Harrenhal, the only castle large enough to facilitate the sheer number of lords expected to attend. There would be dozens of claimants who came forward at the Great Council, some with more valid claims than others. But the reality of the situation was, the Great Council was always going to come down to 2 candidates. Prince Viserys Targaryen, the 24-year-old son of the late Prince Balon, grandson to the king via his father. The second, Laenor Velaryon, only 7 years of age at this time, the great-grandson of the king, via his mother, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen. It is said that Corlys Velaryon used his immense wealth to persuade lords to vote for Laenor. But even with all these efforts, it became clear that Viserys was the favourite. While primogeniture favoured Laenor, Jaehaerys' great-grandson, the principle of proximity, favoured Viserys, Jaehaerys' grandson. Many at the council felt the male line had to take precedent over the female line, nor was Laenor's age a favourable factor. Should the king die before he came of age, a regency would need to take place. Although Laenor did have the support of Lord Bourbon Baratheon, Lord Eddard Stark, Lord Manderley, Lord Dustin, Lord Blackwood, Lord Bar Emmon, and Lord Celtigar, among others, the assembled lords overwhelmingly voted for Prince Viserys. While the actual number of votes was never revealed, it is said that the vote had been more than 20-1 in Viserys' favour, and herein lies the first piece of the puzzle. Rhaenys Targaryen is given the title the Queen Who Never Was for being passed over in favour of Prince Baelon. And while this video is not a debate as to whether or not she had the better claim, or was wronged given her gender, what we can establish is this. Laenor being male, in the eyes of many, would have given him a much more stronger claim than his mother, with the rejection of Laenor not being because of his gender, but the gender of his mother. For many, the Great Council was meant to set a precedent, that the Iron Throne cannot pass to a woman, or through a woman to her son. It's why the Green Council centred their argument for Aegon II over Rhaenyra during the Dance of the Dragons on this idea. Laenor should be just as much aggrieved as Rhaenys that he was passed over, yet in law that does not seem to be the case, with the only recognition of his claim coming during the proposal of the marriage between Rhaenyra and Laenor years later. But the way it's framed with the context of the marriage in the book, of it being bringing the claims of Rhaenys and Viserys together, rather than Laenor and Rhaenyra. Yes, it fixes things via Rhaenys' claim at the cost of Laenor's own being overlooked. You also have to take a step out of lore and take a look at the context via the lens of the fandom. Rhaenys, the Queen Who Never Was, is a beloved character, so it's not hard to understand why the succession issue is primarily looked at through Rhaenys' lens and not that of Laenor. The TV adaptation of the Dance of the Dragons, House of the Dragon, kinda confirms this idea further, with the way the Great Council of 101 is portrayed on screen, given the changes to the characters' ages and show timeline. In the show, it's a clear-cut choice between Viserys and Rhaenys, and not Laenor. And while this does simplify the complex politics of the time for the audience, it does again come at the cost of Laenor's own claim. Thus, I do think it's fair that if Rhaenys is the Queen Who Never Was, that Laenor is the king who never was. But the idea of Laenor's claim extends much further than just the Great Council. To see how things would have changed if it were acknowledged, we need to delve into more Laenor lore, specifically to his marriage with Rhaenyra. One objection was raised. Laenor Velaryon was now 19 years of age, yet had never shown any interest in women. Instead, he surrounded himself with handsome squires of his own age, and was said to much prefer their company. But Grand Maester Mellos dismissed this concern out of hand. What of it? He is supposed to have said, "I am not fond of fish, but when fish is served, I eat it." Thus the match was decided. The writings of Gyldayn on the discussions to arrange a marriage alliance between Rhaenyra Targaryen and Laenor from Fire and Blood. In 114 AC, when King Viserys I Targaryen and his small council sought a husband for Viserys' chosen heir, Rhaenyra, the small council agreed on Laenor Velaryon, as such a marriage would unite House Targaryen and Velaryon once again, putting the Great Council of 101 AC behind them. The only objection raised to the match was Laenor's apparent lack of interest in women. It was well known on Driftmark that he preferred the company of handsome squires of his own age, and had never known a woman intimately. The fact he had not fathered any bastards is often cited as more proof to this. But Grand Maester Mellos dismissed this concern, and the match was agreed upon. While Princess Rhaenyra herself openly objected to the match as well, she conceded after King Viserys threatened to replace her as heir with her half-brother, Aegon. When the pair married, the groom was 20 years of age, the bride 17, and all agreed they made a handsome couple. Given he was marrying the Princess of Dragonstone, a fortnight before the wedding, Laenor was knighted. During the tourney held to celebrate the wedding, Rhaenyra gave her favour to her new champion, Sir Harwin Strong, and Laenor laughed and gave his own favour to his favourite, Sir Joffrey Longmouth. During the tourney, Joffrey was mortally wounded by Sir Criston Cole of the Kingsguard and Rhaenyra's former sworn shield, dying 6 days later. According to the testimony of Mushroom, Laenor spent all that time by Joffrey's bedside and wept bitterly when Joffrey finally died, which in turn added more fuel to the fire regarding the sexuality of Laenor Velaryon. Afterwards, Laenor returned to Driftmark, causing many to even wonder if the marriage had been consummated, as Rhaenyra herself remained at court. While at high tide, Laenor found a new favourite in Sir Khal Quarry. Laenor and Rhaenyra would spend much of their time apart from one another, although he did join her occasionally at court for important events, where his presence was expected. Regardless of this, Rhaenyra's pregnancy was soon announced, and in the waning days of 114 AC, she gave birth to their first child. Laenor wished to name the child Joffrey over his lost favourite, but was overruled by his father, who named the boy Jacaerys. Rhaenyra gave birth to a second son a year later, who was named Lucerys. According to Septon Eustace, both Laenor and Rhaenyra's rumoured lover Sir Harwin Strong were at Rhaenyra's bedside for the births. As both of his sons by Rhaenyra looked nothing like either Laenor or Rhaenyra, their appearance gave cause to rumour regarding their parentage. When Lucerys was presented at court, Queen Alicent Hightower told Laenor to keep trying, as sooner or later you may get one that looks like you. After this incident, Rhaenyra, unable to stand Alicent anymore, returned to her seat of Dragonstone, accompanied by Sir Harwin. Laenor was said to have visited frequently. By 117 AC, Rhaenyra gave birth to her third son, whom Laenor was finally allowed to name Joffrey, in honour of Sir Joffrey Longmouth. As Joffrey also had the common look of his brothers, and not the Valyrian appearances of Laenor and Rhaenyra, his birth was once again started the rumour that all three children had been fathered by Harwin Strong, and not Laenor. In 120 AC, Laenor was murdered in broad daylight by his friend, Sir Khal Quarry, while attending a fair at Spicetown. The merchants present reported that the two men had been quarrelling loudly before blades had come out. Sir Eustace insists that Khal had killed Laenor out of jealousy, believing that Laenor had become enamoured of a new, younger male favourite. But according to the testimony of Mushroom, Khal had Laenor killed on behalf of Prince Daemon Targaryen, leaving Rhaenyra open for marriage. Laenor's body was collected by his father, Lord Corlys, who offered a reward of 10,000 golden dragons for anyone who could lead him to Sir Khal, or bring Sir Khal to him. However, Corey was never seen again. Now, when it comes to the marriage pact and the concept of Laenor being a king who never was, there are two aspects of it that very much jump out when looking at it through the idea of Laenor being the true king who never was. The key advantage to the match was repairing the damaged relationship between House Targaryen and Velaryon, and merging the claims of Viserys and Rhaenys via their children. But an interesting detail with this match is that, namely, in the event that Laenor had won the vote at the Great Council of 101, and had been named Jaehaerys' heir, this match between Laenor and Rhaenyra is still incredibly likely to have happened, albeit with the roles now reversed. Viserys, and therefore Rhaenyra, would now be the aggrieved party, with the match being used to the same effect to fix relations between the houses and merge the claims. House of the Dragon changing the ages of characters and moving the timeline around, as well as changes in general, did confuse a lot of lore elements. But I did like the fact it did address one big issue that I've had with Fire and Blood, and the concept of what would happen to the family name of Targaryen if Laenor had been named heir. Would the royal dynasty now change to Velaryon? Would Jaehaerys have allowed that to happen? This very matter is often used as an example by fans as to why Viserys should never have named Rhaenyra heir. I always assumed there'd be some kind of explanation, like Rhaenyra's children having the name Targaryen rather than Velaryon when they took the throne, or something to that effect. But I did like how the show directly addressed this aspect when making the marriage pact. But it does make me wonder, in an instance Laenor had won the Great Council vote, would he have ascended the throne as Velaryon or Targaryen? What exactly would a King Laenor look like in this situation? And what's so compelling about Laenor as a character, at least in the books, is the uncertainty regarding his sexuality. I do think on balance the evidence does seem to suggest he was indeed more interested in men. But a question this does leave me with is, in a situation where we have a King Laenor, do events play out as they did in Fire and Blood? Does he still not father any legitimate children with Rhaenyra should he marry her? There is a lot of variables, such as the likelihood of Harwin and Rhaenyra happening in this instance. Would Laenor ensure he fathered at least Rhaenyra's first child? Or was it really just not going to happen, which is the road House of the Dragon went down? I can still see room for a Dance of the Dragons-like situation if Laenor and Rhaenyra's children were still illegitimate, where a son of Viserys could push his claim. Should Laenor really be known as the king who never was? Probably not. I think on balance, the passing over of Rhaenys was a much more significant event in terms of history. The reason Laenor's claim is even passed over relates back to Rhaenys' own claim. However, I do believe that Laenor's claim, as the lore shows us, is very much overlooked. It can stand on its own, just as very closely linked to his mother's. But when we think of Laenor Velaryon, he could very easily have been king if the chips had fallen in his favour. What I do find ironic about this idea is, given what little we know of Laenor as a person in the books, I get the idea he would have made a similar king to Viserys, throwing lavish feasts and tourneys, light-hearted and jovial, and like Viserys, his own reign very well could have faced similar issues in terms of succession, as Viserys' ultimately did. And while it would look very different, I do believe some kind of Dance of the Dragons-like event still very well could have occurred. But the biggest question here is, would Laenor himself have even wanted to be king? While I do tend to separate the show and the book, I don't think the show's take on Laenor would have wanted or enjoyed being the ruling king. His need for adventure and a life at war and at sea would directly contradict his ability to be king. He would ultimately be restless and unhappy in the role. Perhaps if he was king as a child, if he had won the Great Council votes, he may have been moulded differently, but maybe that sense of freedom and adventure was always in his nature.